All right. So, Pluto, often equated with Hades. Mm, kind of a similar story, but we're gonna go with the astrological definition. Typically, Pluto is seen as many have probably already seen, as the archetype of power. People say like death and transformation, but it's also power. I mean, if you look at it, what is the link between transformation and death? Well, because if you're dying, it's got to go somewhere, right? And one of the things I find that depending on the placement of your chart, depending on the placement of Pluto in your chart, any aspects to Pluto, what sign it's in, what house it's in, it adds flavor to that energy of Pluto, or that feeling of Pluto. What is Pluto in us, anyways? I can tell you right now, based on not only my observation but also research, but I also have Sun Pluto conjunction, and I have Pluto trine my moon. So I'm not doing this to show off. I'm saying I pretty much understand what Pluto is. It's like people have the, I guess you can say, the right to, well, they have the right, yes, to fear kind of going deeper into Pluto. What is Pluto? I mean, Pluto is kind of like the lord of the underworld, right? If you think about Pluto, it's the darkness within. It's all the things associated with Pluto: abuse, rape, misuse, all the stuff that's usually tied to the sign of Scorpio. Except Scorpio has Mars as its ruling planet, which makes it so that Scorpio is more about the adventure. Pluto, on the other hand, is a high vibration of Mars. So, yes, there's that sort of fighting, yes, there's sort of that initiative. But Pluto seeks realness beyond the real, and it's extreme, and it's beyond the extreme, and it's I mean, I could just probably say that because I'm thinking, because I have Uranus square my moon, my Mercury Uranus conjunction square my moon. So I'm not sure how that works for other people, but it's definitely like where Pluto is concerned, it's tied to ego death because it's tied to the sun. So even though it is ego death, it's also death. So anything that Pluto attaches itself to is made to transform that energy. The house it's in, it's made to transform that energy as well. That usually means a lot of like wounding, a lot of loss, suffering. Usually it stems from that power. When I say power, I mean the certainty of like, especially when when we're humans and we're attached to form. Pluto is that energy of like, no, you're going to flay yourself alive, literally like, on and on and on and on and on and again and again and again and again. And it's a slow moving planet. If you look at Pluto, it's like, I believe it's 284 years orbit around the sun. So the changes to the ego, if you have Sun Pluto ego, Sun Pluto conjunction, Sun Pluto conjunction, ego, okay, it actually teaches us to be real. First, we, as a young person, I mean, for me, I kind of like projected onto others. That's part of the shadow thing. Shadow is tied to Pluto. So the reason it's tied to Pluto is because shadow looks deep into our personal desires, what we really want, and that sort of desire to not only be in control, but like trust, kind of, because there's a lot of wounding with Pluto, there's a lot of loss and death and suffering. Like, it's not that you need to have suffering, but it's the kind of thing that the soul comes here to learn, that when it comes to the life that we choose to be here in, It's full of that sort of, it's really power. And again, power is, it's simply put, it's like that ability, right? Power comes from pouvoir in French. So it's kind of linked to that, but it's definitely more than just ability. But it's this feeling of a disconnect with fallacies and lies and anything that's not true, anything that's not genuine. We perceive sometimes as humans that it's like, oh, this is real, this is for real, this is real. Pluto always questions that. Pluto always goes like, are you fucking sure about that? As I don't sense it. Like, having Pluto trine my moon, I have this automatic sensation of like when people are lying. I can tell, just like, that's why even I question myself. I question, like, when I post these things, am I coming off, sincere? Am I coming off genuine? Is it, like swearing and all that stuff? That's not being sincere. none of these, the human ego, wants. Real power comes from taking back that power and realizing that we are never disconnected. But Pluto, the story of Pluto is actually quite, I wouldn't say, I don't know if I want to describe it as interesting, because there's not much I've discovered on it. I mean, just look at Wikipedia. If you just look at it, right? He talks about the word abduction. I mean, they talk about abduction, that he's kind of like the abductor. So, I mean, this is besides all the stuff that astrology stuff I've learned in my astrology books, and I'm pretty sure classes will say other things too as well. So, but Pluto is all about, it's part of the kidnapping, right? Abduction is kidnapping. And I looked into the etymology of the word abduction. Right? It says here, abduction. It's in the 1620s, it was said to be leading away. So it's something to do with leading away, meaning like, it has that Mars energy to it, like leading, being a leader, initiative, right? Away from, it's taking away from. So it's a lot about taking away from, but a forcible carrying off as well, ravishing, robbing, so rape, right? But what is rape? Is it sexual? Not really. It's said to be, for those who are rape victims, once I've read so far, what I've seen is that they do say that it's about power, because it's like, the only reason we look for power outside of ourselves is because we never had it, or we lack this belief of power. It's all in the head, right? But it's so deep and it's trenched into like our bodies. Pluto rules the any sort of excretion, like the anus, right? If you try to put anything there, if you try to have, let's say, even things like anal sex, it's intense, coming from a gay man. So, right? It's intense. That feeling of intensity, it makes you really also vulnerable. It's real vulnerability. I'm not saying that women are not vulnerable. I'm not saying that. But it is in that lower area. Right? Mars rules more of the reproductive organs, but it does tie into sex as well. But it's really about power. So again, the whole abducting thing comes from that. To lead away, to take away, to arrest. So away from, right? So to lead away from, okay. It's also a criminal act of forcibly taking someone, specifically, right? Abduction, so forcibly. Force. Stems from, it's connected to power. So if we don't have power, we look for power. That's what it is, because we believe that we don't have power. Okay, if you look at the mythology back again into this one, Pluto says here, according to this, was disassociated from the violent abductor of Kore. I don't know, I feel like it's still connected to that. And then I saw some other things here that, according to, I think, in Ovid's books, he talks about the abduction of Proserpina, or Persephone, the Greek, the original name. What do you call this? I saw something here. 1 second here. And that's the other thing. People who tend to not have Pluto, and I'm going to say this out loud, so astrologers sometimes we'll say something, right? But usually the best sources we can get is actually from the experience of people. How does it feel to them? Especially if they don't have a retrograde Pluto, it's easier to feel. It's easier to sense that. But they'll know, especially when they practice like awareness and they're really they're really in contact with their body. They know what the Pluto energy is. So it's usually best to ask those people. I'm not saying this out of pride or anything, but it is also. Don't ask a person. I feel like Pluto is not known yet for a lot of people unless you have strong Pluto placement, especially in the personal planets. Okay, especially if it's square, conjunction, trine, yes, opposition is a definite one too. So you want to ask those people, like, what does it feel like to you? Did you feel like what's your take on power? Did you feel like you were raped? Did you feel like you were raped, not literally, but also like raped of different things, or things taken from you, right? The other thing I noticed about this, which is so true of Pluto, he apparently didn't have a lot of children, and that ties in with the whole, like, he's apparently monogamous, and that's very true. Although, I consider myself like polyamorous, so it's kind of weird, but that's just like more of like the desire sort of thing. I have Mars conjunct Lust, yeah, the asteroid called Lust. Anyways, the point is, it's probably more of a lust thing. But I've always been kind of monogamous. Every time I got into a relationship, it was just like, that's it. Nobody else. I didn't even look at anybody else. It kind of just disappeared. I just went straight into the relationship. It was just like really committed. Laser focused. It's just like, this is it. So that's one thing. So it does tie in with the energy. That energy of like, we don't need much. We just need something that's one thing that's meaningful in our lives, and that to us is our riches. Pluto is actually tied to what is it called? He's Pluto the rich, according to the mythology, and at least in Roman mythology. Okay. He also talks about being obscure. Yes, that's because Pluto is not very direct and straightforward. But the thing is, the reason for that is because, again, of the innate sort of questioning. It looks like distrust. Yes, there is distrust, but also like that questioning of like, what is real? If you look at the countries today that have moon is probably the best one, but Sun conjunct Pluto. I'll tell you several countries that have that. The Netherlands, one of them, Norway, South Korea, Australia, Palestine. Just look at the history of Palestine. Look at what's happening with Palestine, right? There's a lot of look at this history of South Korea. They're like conquered, so there's a lot of raping, right? The Netherlands, they were kind of small as well, right? Pluto is a small planet, so it's that feeling of like feeling small and powerless. That's what it is, power and powerlessness, or powerfulness. Usually it's the opposite. So, there's a bunch of other planets. Pakistan, India. Pluto rules pandemics, okay, viruses, bacteria, fungi, the mycelial network. Okay, that's Pluto. So anything that's rotting, anything that's old and rotting and decaying, because it's meant to be transformed through the darkness to the disgusting things, the things we turn away from, the things that are taboo, right? Anything from what people might used to call anything from witchcraft to homosexuality to bestiality, you name it, to cannibalism, tattoos, that's a simple one, okay, zombieism, dark humor. It's very intense, a strong, intense energy. It's just like, right, it's very, I don't know where I got this from, but I think sometimes when I would get mad, at least before, I would say like, you do not want to make someone with its Sun Pluto conjunction bring the fucking gates of Hades down and on you, because you will not know what to expect. And it is intense, it is scary, but that's for us to transform and not for you to do anything, and just trust that we can handle it. That's the whole thing. It's very intense. It's very intense, and it's very intimidating. I've been called intimidating by people before. I didn't think I was intimidating. I was just being myself. So it comes naturally. right? So we're not trying to intimidate others. It's just that we want to make sure that we have full capacity to be ourselves. Even if it's through mistakes, even if it's through death, okay? Even if it's through the worst kind of things, we want to be able to get that support. The support that's the feeling of like trust. I'll tell you right now, take my word for it. If you know someone with Sun Pluto, I mean, we're not just talking about Scorpio here, we're talking Sun Pluto conjunction. Also Sun Moon conjunction, or Sun Moon, any Sun Moon and Sun, especially Sun and Moon placements to Pluto. Yes. Okay. When I talk to other Sun Pluto people, I often don't force anything on them either. I just let them be, because I know exactly what it's like. Do not tell what a Sun Pluto is what to do. Don't tell them what to do. Don't be encouraging, be supportive, just be there and be present. Really be present. I mean, it's easier said than done, because or rather, we see it all the time with other people. But one of the things about Sun Pluto placements is that there's trauma rooted in that. There's trauma rooted in that. When I say trauma, I mean it could be a current life and or ancestral and or galactic, like, really far back. So either way, it's there. Okay. It's also, I noticed that Pluto and Orpheus have a story. If you know Orpheus, he was the kind of a musician god. He was the one who's able to he's kind of rooted, he's tied to lullabies. So when he's able to express his emotions, he's able to calm you down, he's able to make you feel what he feels. That's Orpheus. And the thing how he's tied to Orpheus, I found earlier today as I was reading this, is that when Orpheus went to the underworld to save his wife, to rescue his wife, it's similar to kind of like that. It kind of feels more like an equivalent or a mirroring of Pluto stealing, or Hades stealing Persephone, or Pluto abducting Proserpina. So it's that whole taking of what feels like it's yours, meaning what belongs to you, right? Pluto is, it is a high vibration of Mars, but it's still very much tied to, that's why it connects with the 8th house, it's like possessions. So, and the reason we want that is because we want certainty, again, tied to power. It's not just having something, it's power. Trust me, it's power. That certainty of like that whole like connection, that it's like, but one of the things we learn to do is to let go, always let go. Especially Sun-Pluto conjunction, Sun-Pluto, not just Moon. We're always like dying to the ego. The ego is always dying, all the time. We're talking all the time. And at the very beginning, it's quite intense. It's like so intense that you just literally want to die. And then it kind of dissipates over time. The more trauma we experience, the more we're able to handle it. And that's one of those things that many people don't know about Sun-Pluto conjunction, especially conjunction. Well, okay, I guess I would say conjunction alone. Jacob Ian, something, whatever, just as other astrologer, he talks about how the square aspects tend to be more like external from you. It comes off because of like kind of like the universe giving it to you so you can learn the lesson. A conjunction is, according to Stephen Forrest, based on his book, said a conjunction is kind of like you know how to work with that energy. It's kind of like you're there to master it, or rather you already have the mastery of it. It's not perfect, it's not about perfection, but it's just knowing that. But I feel like for me it's more about, I know how to handle it, I know how to work with that power. And one of the things in my previous videos, if you look into my channel, we talk about, I was talking about, what is this? The power of silence. Sometimes you don't say anything. That's the thing about Pluto as well. When the pandemic happened, did people really expect that? No. I had this, but for me, it was like I had this sort of creeping, looming, insidious feeling that something dangerous was coming. I had this strong sense. It was very instinctive. And even though some people at work, this is when I was in a music school, and some people were talking about, oh, this is saying this, and then right away I felt this like return of this trauma. It's like, oh, death is coming. And so even though Pluto knows how to work with power, it's a learning process. Because if you think about how slow it moves in the orbit, that in itself will say that the learning process is slow. I mean, I think Pluto has already passed. No, Pluto hasn't even done the signs yet. Once it's passed all the signs, I think once it's gone into Aquarius, just coming in about 2 weeks from this, I believe when I post this video, about 2 weeks, November 20, 19th or the 20th, Pluto will have gone through, I think all of the 12 signs. So that's when we'll actually know more about Pluto. But I can tell you right now from personal experience, it also comes down to talking to the people. I'm not saying that's the point of this video, I'm just saying right now. In a way, that's part of it as well. So anyways, I wanted to add that before I go into the other planets or the asteroids that I work with, particularly when it comes to the whole idea of surrender and detachment, or rather de-attachment, right? So integration as well. Although we know that Chiron is about integration, or a lot of us know that Chiron is about integration, working with your wounds, because in the mythology, he was a centaur that was immortal, but he couldn't heal when he was shot with an arrow. He couldn't heal the wound, so he kept suffering. So he used that. He used that in, I guess you could say, repurpose the pain to purpose. Yeah, he used it. Yeah, purpose to pain to purpose, right? So Chiron is like that. So, but that's I mean, you just look at the myth, and that's how you'll get a glimpse of it if you feel it. When I say that, I don't say it lightly. When I say stuff like feel it and all that stuff, I don't say it lightly. I mean in like, I don't know how to describe the emotions. Just like when you see a bunch of videos, like how do you do this? How do you detach? How do you find peace? The best way is to experience it yourself. As harsh as it may sound, as if nobody wants to help you, that is the way. If you talk to anyone, and we're talking just going back, I mean, if we were talking, even speaking of like Pluto thing, it's like I don't know how to speak English. When it comes to Pluto, because we go through so much already, we really don't like seeing people who are always asking questions. And that's another thing about Pluto. We don't like people asking questions and not doing anything about it. Or asking questions and as if it's like, yeah, you're not doing anything about it, but at the same time it's like, well, you're not really learning. Pluto doesn't like that. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I can't really speak on behalf of other people, but for me, it's a kind of it's a turn off. It's like, that's why I keep saying, or at least I've said a lot of times, that it's like the best ways to learn from the experience, even if that means death. Hard pill to swallow? Abso-fucking-lutely. Okay, because we know powerlessness. We know what it's like to not know, not understand, not be empowered, take things taken away from you, living poor, living in poverty, having viruses, being sick, almost dying, loss, pain, suffering, all those kind of suffering, right? So we understand those things, and we work through it, and we're constantly learning how to really transform that, and really transform it. I mean, to the point where it's just like, oh, I feel free. People who have matured enough with this placement will understand. It's like, sometimes we can be there for others as well. Again, though, if you're not doing the work, if we're not putting in the effort, just the little things. If you're not being real with yourself, not real, but real with others. If you're not owning those emotions, Pluto, it's kind of like, for us, it feels kind of like almost like a waste of time. it's not a waste of time. It's just I don't know. I guess maybe I'm speaking on more on my behalf because it's like a Libra thing. I have Pluto in Libra, so for me, genuine relationship means that if I'm helping you this much, if I'm giving you this much of this energy, you better make sure that you reciprocate that. And that's one of those things. The relationships are a transaction, and that's one of the things I'm also learning myself. It's like, oh yeah, every relationship is a transaction, and I may not necessarily like what other people are doing, but it's trying to accept that everybody's just different, and that's one of the things too. However, there is that stubborn side to Pluto, which is like, if it's not genuine, if it's like even just a little bit, even with ourselves, we kind of feel like it's disgusting. Why? Right? So again, it kind of ties back to power. And when I mean power, it's also tied into like, especially with the moon, the sun placement. It's a lot of his ego, right? So there's still, even for an older person, there's still going to be that feeling of like the ego coming in, and just especially with Libra, it's like, you're not putting in the work, you're not putting in the effort. I don't think this is going to be worth my time. I'm sorry, I already have a lot on my plate, right? And that's like dipping the toe in the water. That's not even anything, right? So, yeah. So I don't know if you've met anyone else who has that placement, but if you do, trust them. Trust them. Trust that even if they make mistakes, that's part of the process. Trust it. Okay? It's not that we know what we're doing. That's nothing to do with that at all. But we'd like you to trust us. That's the whole thing about it. Especially if it's a Scorpio thing. Scorpio tends to want to do that more. It's more about the trust. Libras, yes. Yeah. So again, depends on the sign that Pluto and your sun is in. If it's a split between two signs, that's a bit complex, but it's still there. Okay, I wanted to also add in the other things. So tied to Pluto is Lilith. For those who don't know Lilith, she's kind of like the equivalent of Pluto. Technically, it's Persephone, but it's kind of both. But we're talking about detachment and integration, right? So Lilith is a shadow. Lilith is shadow work. She's the aspect of Pluto. And by the way, I wanted to add back here that apparently Pluto was also in the Roman mythology, tied to kind of as an aspect of the dark. I wouldn't call it dark, but he was kind of like they called him something like, Jupiter, sorry. Jupiter was tied to Pluto. And what that means is that because if you look at the history, apparently, I'm not sure, but Jupiter, or rather the planet Jupiter, was supposed to be kind of like a second sun on this solar system, but it never came to be that way. That's why it's so huge. So the fact that in Roman mythology, they considered Pluto as an aspect of Jupiter shows that it's like that dark side of our ego, the dark side of optimism, the dark side of expansion. It's actually coming in instead of like expanding, it's going in like this. This is Pluto as well. It's almost like Saturn, but Saturn is about creating those boundaries. Pluto is more like, no, go inwards. No, go inwards. Don't expand, go inwards. Not until you've rotted and actually transformed and transmuted, then you may expand. That's the process of Pluto. At least one of them. So, again, going back to detachment. So Lilith is that way. When we look at integration, that's really what the shadow is. Shadow work, really specifically, and Lilith represents that. Osiris is also pretty much also detachment. Literally, he's detachment, because he was chopped into pieces by his brother Sethos, right? So, and I have Osiris conjunct my north node, along with Vesta, and what's the other one? And Odin, and Iduna, and a bunch of other asteroids. Those are the main ones that I've seen. So Osiris is also about betrayal. Betrayal specifically like fraternal, like brother. This has happened to me. Okay, I'm not close to my brother at all. And that's okay. I've come to the point where it's just like, he's in his own path. And I don't know if I want to build that relationship. It's just, that's what it is. It might come off like it's not believable, like I have some issues, but I'm like, well, yeah, because that's what it is. The energy of distrust there is not because I hate him. It's more like, he's probably not going to change, and that's totally fine. You know, when I see him, which is rare, it's just like, we're just like acquaintances. To me, it's an acquaintance. He's an acquaintance. He's not my brother. As in, like, that strong, intense feeling. And that's just me. That's what I honor. I've seen people who told me, it's like, why don't you get along with your brother? It's like, right away, intensely, like, and this is the ego as well. But I have to honor that and say, well, no. Stop telling me what to do. Don't tell me what to do. Stop it. Stop it. Or else this will be over. This will be over. The burning bridges, Pluto people, Pluto with strong placements with Pluto, yeah, you know how to burn bridges, okay? I'm just letting you know right now. Don't do that. Don't tell Pluto people what to do. Don't. Just be there. Stop giving advice when they're not asking for it. That's the whole thing, okay? So that's one thing. I'm not trying to suppress it. You see the intensity right there? That's a Pluto thing, okay? So the other one, the other asteroid is Lameia. So there's Lilith and there's Osiris. There's also Lameia. Lameia is complete dissatisfaction. She lost her children, so she ended up either eating children or kidnapping children. Ties in a lot. It's very Plutonian, right? She's very like lost. She's like a succubus. She gets energy. So she's pretty much your she's like Narcissus, except it's not about beauty, it's about loss. So either way, she's like this narcissist. It's tied to narcissism, but it's like complete like wounding. So the key to Lameia is to be detached has to be complete surrender to the loss itself. As in, you go into the body and you realize there's a purpose behind it. When I say going to the body, I mean when we really surrender, we know the connection, we start to get the real connection through meditation. Again, it's not about the process, it's not about the method, just, breathing, allowing for it, and surrender. I've said this in previous videos, I've said it again and again and again and again and again and again and again. And I'm saying that, yes, because there's a bit of resentment there, okay? And I'm not trying to be hateful when it comes to resentment. I'm just saying it's like, I've gone through enough in my life to say that it's like when it comes to these things, just try it. But if you don't want to, that's totally fine. But I'm just saying I've seen so many people that they get all this stuff with the internet, with all that stuff, information we get. It's almost like, what do you want to do? You get the information. What are you going to do about the information? It's just going to be like in the air. Nothing, right? It doesn't make sense. Because what we really want is not the knowledge. We want the experience. Therefore, we want the wisdom from that knowledge. Or rather, from the experience. Okay? Knowledge, yes, knowledge, but also wisdom from that experience. So experience it. That's the whole point. Okay? I'm being empathetic, as my dad always says. Okay? I apologize if this is coming off a little bit triggering. That's how it is. Okay? I'm not trying to put anyone down. I'm just saying this is what it is. The other thing, Lucifer. Ooh, the devil. Okay. It's like, but Lucifer was like, he's kicked out, right? So if there's anything about Lucifer, it's about he was detached in the first place. He was removed because he was, I mean, it's a long story, but the way I see it is like he was trying to be himself. There's that, he's the archetype of losing connection to source because there's too much ego and pride. But what's the thing about the archetype of Lucifer is that it can be repurposed towards something more whole. We have this idea of humans, like, which is, I'm really starting to get it more and more every time I process it, that we have this duality nature as humans, right? Good or bad, good or bad, good or bad. It's a separation, more separation, more separation. That's Lucifer, right? It's not to say that we should go ahead and kill and eat people and murder them and disembowel people in front of their faces. It doesn't mean we should commit genocide or be tyrants. It doesn't mean any of those things at all. It means we're using the darkness inside of us and seeing what exactly is missing there. Or rather, what do we need to heal, and what do we need to, first of all, validate? What do we need to get into and accept? And it's like, oh, that's why inner child stuff is also helpful. Now, speaking of child, there's another asteroid called Child. Child is completely detached, right? Child is the asteroid of like children. Very simple. They're not attached to the outcome. And they're very, especially the younger they are, like toddlers, completely present, completely conscious. Okay? So that's that. I already mentioned Chiron in the beginning. He's about integration. There's also Balder. Balder he was the like invincible hero in Norse mythology. He was, I would say Balder is kind of detachment and integration is because you never know things. Balder represents short-lived things, so he represents those things that are short-lived. And invincibility, this ego invincibility, Balder kind of represents when you're young, youthfulness. It's like, oh, I'm not gonna get sick, and then you learn from that and you're like, I'm dead, oh, I'm sick, oh, I'm wounded, I'm hurt, I'm wounded, I didn't expect that. Not to say you anticipate those things. It has nothing to do with anticipation. It has more to do with, okay, right now, I know I feel like I sense what I'm capable of, and that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to work with inspiration. I'm going to work with what I love to do. I'm just going to do that. I'm not going to go either way in polarities. I'm not going to be like, I'm poor me, or I'm not going to be like, I'm better than you. No, it's just like being in that neutral place and really being like, it's more than humble. It's a childlike thing. And you should enjoy it, right? Like for me, that's what I'm learning. So these are the placements close to. I have child conjunct my sun as well. So I understand the desire to just be normal and just, when I want to say that. Okay, yes, normal as in the grand scale of things, not the human normal. Normal is just I just want to enjoy. I just want to be myself. I just want to be myself. If I sometimes want to fart in front of people, I don't want to have to worry about being, or even think about the whole like, people think, oh my god, he just farted. Oh my god, it's so god. Oh my god, and it's so immature. Oh my god, labels, judgment. I was watching a podcast one time, a video, whatever, and they were talking about how we tend to, and I'm going to include myself in it because I still do it, that we judge, and that's actually technically kind of the opposite of love. R.J. Spina said that, right? It's like that whole like, well, yeah, because the moment we judge something, the moment we continue, it's like, oh, this is what it is, we're attaching ourselves to that, and therefore it's not unconditional love. It's attachment. You can call it human love. We can rationalize all we want. Again, that's the head thing. Unconditional love is beyond all that. For some of you, you probably already heard a lot of this. But it's more than just what's here. It has to be embodied. I can tell you right now, I'm continuously learning to embody these again and again and again and again. Ego fucking death. Okay, so then the last one here is the asteroid. Actually, she's a dwarf planet, I believe. Ceres. Ceres was Demeter in Greek mythology. Ceres is the Roman equivalent. So she lost her daughter to Hades. So she had to go through this whole like repetition of lost her daughter. Half of the year she would be in the underworld, and then she'd be back. So she had to go through these ups and downs. I have the sun conjunct Pluto, right? But it's square Ceres. So she's about like basic needs and feeling nurtured. But it's Ceres apparently rules epigenetics, which actually makes sense because from my experience, every sort of thing that I didn't deal with, any sort of trauma, any inner child stuff, stays there. It stays embedded. How do I know? Because I'm reactive to certain things still. When there's a reaction, that's an automatic thing. Subconscious is automatic. That means it stems back from inner childhood wounding. At least inner childhood wounding. So, that's it for now. I have to go actually right now. But I wanted to actually create this video to let you know that there's more to, I guess, what astrology says or the books say than meets the eye. If by any chance you do run into things like you're questioning, look at your chart. Look at what's in your life. Go back to your own life and what you're experiencing. If you can't do that, talk to people and say, how do you do this? You ask them for their chart. And if you see certain placement, that's really how you learn. It's really what it is. It's direct application, right? And specifically when it comes to something like this, like Pluto, ask what their experience is. It's going to be a little bit different in mine, even though I have Sun, Pluto conjunction, trine Moon. Okay, so it depends. And I mean, because it's in Libra, my Venus was in Virgo, but I also include Eris into the equation. Eris rules Libra for me, and some astrologers might disagree. I don't fucking care. Okay, so and Libra, for most Libras, in this life for the past, I don't know, at least several hundred years, Eris is in Aries. That means we have this sort of like, we tend to kind of have initiative. There's a bit of initiative in us. Well, there's always an initiative already. It's a cardinal sign, but there's initiative into the sort of like sovereignty and feeling like, you know, it's that Aries energy tied to Eris. But we're not here to talk about Eris. We're not here. This video is not about Eris. So anyways, but that's all for today. Thank you for watching, you guys. If you have any questions, comments down below. Thank you very much for your time. Have a good day.